After 11 years, they fired me by email. No meeting, no phone call, not even a shred of human decency. Just a single line in my inbox. Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately. That was it. 11 years of my life, gone in the span of a sentence. I sat there staring at the screen, the glow of my laptop reflected in the half-empty coffee mug on my desk. For a moment, the world went completely silent, as if time itself had paused. My name is Daniel Hart, 44 years old. Until that morning, I was a senior operations manager at Iron Veil Industries, a company that built itself on precision, discipline, and loyalty. Or at least that's what they liked to preach. For over a decade, I'd given them everything. Long nights, weekends, projects nobody else wanted to touch. I'd kept quiet when promotions passed me by, when credit for my work ended up on someone else's desk, when raises turned into excuses about tough quarters. I kept my head down and delivered. Always. And then, they cut me loose with an email. I didn't rage. I didn't slam my fist on the desk or call anyone to demand answers. That's not who I am. I simply closed the laptop, wrote the date in a small leather notebook I kept in my briefcase, and underlined it twice. Then I poured another cup of coffee and sat back. I knew exactly what was happening. Months earlier, I had seen signs. The whispers in the hallways, meetings scheduled without me, projects quietly reassigned. I noticed financial reports going missing from the shared drives. Redacted versions replacing complete ones. I saw the CFO, Brian Kingsley, meeting privately with vendors I'd never heard of, invoices being approved without going through the proper chain. Nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe they didn't want to. But I did. So when that email arrived, I didn't break. I adjusted. Because the truth was, I had been preparing for this moment long before it came. In my notebook, I had 3 words written on the very first page. Watch. Record. Wait. I didn't tell anyone about the patterns I'd noticed. I didn't tip off my colleagues or push back at the executives. I observed, quietly, every odd invoice, every unauthorized access, every financial irregularity. I copied files, archived emails, and stored them off-site. Not because I wanted revenge at the time, but because I trusted my instincts. Something was coming, and now it had arrived. That afternoon, while they congratulated themselves for cutting costs and cleaning house, I pored over the files in my possession. 11 years inside Iron Veil had given me a front-row seat to every flaw in their system. They thought I was just another cog they could replace, but I had become something else, the silent witness. The man who had seen everything and said nothing. I didn't reach out to anyone. Not HR. Not my colleagues. Not even my wife. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they would go when they thought I was gone. I wanted to see the cracks form in real time. Because when people think no one is watching, that's when they make their biggest mistakes. So I waited. And I watched. What they didn't know was that their silence would cost them everything. And by the time they realized it, I would already have the knife at their throat, without ever raising my voice. The first week after the email, I didn't apply for a single job. I didn't touch my resume, didn't call recruiters, didn't even tell my neighbors I was out of work. Instead, I settled into a routine. Mornings were for reviewing the archive I had built quietly over the years. Afternoons, I drove around the city, stopping at places where Iron Veil had hidden its deals. Warehouses, secondary offices, contractor addresses that were nothing more than UPS mailboxes. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. I just took note. Iron Veil thought I was gone, irrelevant. That was the beauty of it. In their minds, I no longer existed, which meant they spoke freely. The finance team sent careless emails to vendors, approvals were rubber-stamped without hesitation, and meetings were recorded in the corporate calendar without hiding the details. They were getting sloppy, because they believed no one was paying attention. But I was. My wife, Claire, noticed the change in me. At dinner, she asked if I was worried. I told her I was fine, that I had things under control. She didn't press further. Claire knew me well enough to understand that silence from me meant planning. What I didn't tell her was that I had already discovered something massive, payments that didn't add up. Over the course of a year, nearly $70 million had been routed to a shell company in Delaware. The invoices looked legitimate on the surface, software licensing fees, consulting agreements, but the trail didn't end with any real services rendered. The shell company was a ghost. No employees, No office, no product, just a registered name and a single beneficiary account. The signature authorizing those payments belonged to Brian Kingsley, the CFO, a man who prided himself on his spotless reputation, the one who preached integrity at every town hall meeting, the man who had looked me in the eye during budget reviews and told me numbers don't lie. He was lying. I didn't move yet. Exposing him too soon would only give them time to bury evidence. I needed the fraud to run its full course, to expand beyond the safety net of deniability. So I kept collecting. Late at night, I logged into systems I technically should no longer have access to. They'd revoked my company email, deactivated my badge, but years of building infrastructure meant I had left myself quiet doors. Back doors layered deep in the system. No one knew they existed but me. Ironvale's arrogance had become my weapon. Every night, I copied more files. Vendor agreements, bank transfers, emails marked confidential. I categorized everything, cross-referenced dates, amounts, signatures. I built a structure of proof so complete, so airtight, it could choke the air out of a courtroom. But even then, I stayed silent. I didn't call the authorities. I didn't leak it to the press. I wanted them to keep digging their own grave. Because I understood something no one else at Ironvale did. Power doesn't come from shouting. Power comes from silence, from patience, from letting your enemy believe they've already won. By the end of that week, I had more than evidence of fraud. I had a roadmap leading straight to the heart of Ironvale's corruption, and I was only getting started. By the second week, I realized Ironvale's rot went deeper than I'd first imagined. It wasn't just the CFO siphoning money through shell companies. It was a network woven into the company's veins like a cancer. Contracts with inflated numbers. Consultants who never showed up to meetings. Construction projects billed 3 times over. And all of it signed off with the same handful of names. One night, sitting in my study with nothing but the glow of the monitor and the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, I followed a trail of transfers that led overseas. A bank in Luxembourg, another in the Cayman Islands. Offshore accounts disguised as research investments. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the figures. They weren't hiding petty theft. They were running a machine designed to move hundreds of millions quietly out of reach. I thought back to that email, the one that fired me in a single sentence. It wasn't random. They hadn't eliminated my position because of restructuring. They had eliminated me because I had been too close, too careful. They had cut out the one man who might notice the strings they were pulling. But they miscalculated. Instead of vanishing, I became invisible. Instead of silencing me, they gave me silence to work with. And that was their mistake. Claire noticed the long hours at my desk. She asked one evening, quietly, if I was angry at them. I told her no. Anger was loud, and loud men make mistakes. I wasn't angry. I was patient. And patience is lethal when you know where to strike. That night, I went deeper than I ever had before. Old credentials buried in systems gave me access to executive schedules, board reports, private memos. I read minutes from secret meetings where they congratulated themselves for efficiency gains. Efficiency, I learned, was just their code for theft. By the end of that night, I understood the scale. It wasn't 70 million. It wasn't even 100. The fraud stretched across multiple divisions, hidden in plain sight, layered through subsidiaries and acquisitions. If my math was right, they had stolen close to $600 million over the last 3 years. 600 million. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the number echoing in my head. I thought about the employees who had worked weekends without overtime, the engineers who had skipped vacations, the assistants who had been told the company can't afford raises this year. All while the executives lined their pockets with money funneled out of the very work those people had killed themselves to produce. It was no longer just about me. It wasn't even just about revenge. This was about justice, about showing them that silence cuts sharper than any outburst ever could. I picked up my notebook and wrote one line under the date of my firing. 600 million. Their silence will cost them everything. The deeper I went, the quieter I became. Ironvale thought they had erased me from their story, but in reality, I was writing the ending. I didn't storm into boardrooms, didn't shout about betrayal, didn't threaten lawsuits. Instead, I built a system. Every night, I organized files into layers, fraudulent contracts, offshore transfers, forged signatures. Each piece was a nail in their coffin. I remember one evening in particular. Rain hammered against the windows. The street outside was slick with reflections of passing headlights. Claire had gone to bed hours earlier. I sat in my study, headphones in, listening to recordings from internal calls I'd archived long before my termination. Executives laughed about streamlined billing, congratulated each other on creative allocations. Their voices carried no fear, no hesitation. They believed they were untouchable, but I had something they didn't. I had patience. By the third week, I realized silence was beginning to pressure them in ways they didn't expect. An insider sent me a message from a personal account. Stephen, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored years ago. He wrote that the executives were on edge, meetings had become tense, and the CFO had been spotted leaving the office late at night with folders clutched tightly under his arm. They suspected something, but they didn't know what. They couldn't trace it because I hadn't moved yet. I let them panic. The trick was never to reveal too much at once. Like a chess game, the first move defines the outcome. So I didn't play. I waited. And in waiting, I forced them to play against shadows. Meanwhile, I prepared my ground. I contacted an old friend from college, Mark Ellis, now a corporate attorney with a reputation for cutting through corruption. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. Just enough to test the waters. His answer was short. If what you're saying is true, you're holding dynamite. Handle it carefully. That night, I walked the length of my house in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I thought about the years I had given Iron Vale, the nights I'd stayed in the office past midnight, the family events I'd missed, the loyalty I'd shown when better offers came. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They didn't realize silence can also mean calculation. By the time I sat back down at my desk, the decision was clear. I wasn't going to rush this. $600 million was too big to waste on a premature strike. I needed the fraud to expand until it collapsed under its own weight. And when it did, I would be standing there, calm, ready, with every document in place. I closed the notebook that night with one thought. They had started this game, but I would finish it. Without a word. Without a warning. By the fourth week, I had become a ghost moving through the cracks of Iron Vale's empire. I watched from the shadows as they scrambled, each executive tightening their grip on stolen money, each one more paranoid than the last. They didn't know I was still inside their systems. They didn't know I could see everything. Brian Kingsley, the CFO, became predictable. His emails grew shorter, sharper. Approvals that once passed through 3 desks were now pushed through in minutes. He was accelerating the theft, rushing money out faster than ever. That kind of haste always leaves fingerprints. And I collected every one of them. One night, as the city outside slept under a blanket of fog, I logged into the system and found something new. An emergency board session scheduled for Friday. The subject line was vague, but the tone was urgent. I didn't need details to know what it meant. They were worried. My silence had started to haunt them. They were questioning who might be watching, and the not knowing was eating them alive. I decided it was time to test their nerves. That Thursday morning, Brian received an anonymous envelope at his office. Inside was a single page, one of the fraudulent invoices, with his signature highlighted in red. No explanation, no threat, just the evidence, naked and undeniable. I didn't include my name, didn't include a return address. Only the words, "Watch closely." By evening, Stephen sent me another message. He wrote that the office felt like a pressure cooker. Brian stormed through the halls, snapping at assistants, canceling meetings. Other executives whispered in corners. Nobody knew where the leak was. Nobody trusted anyone. My single page had fractured the illusion of control. And still, I said nothing. Claire asked again that night if I was going to look for another job. I shook my head. She didn't push. She knew I was deep in something, though she didn't know what. My silence at home mirrored my silence at Iron Vale, and both carried weight. That weekend, I drove past Iron Vale's headquarters. The tall glass building stood polished and proud, a monument to greed disguised as progress. I parked across the street and watched employees filter out, unaware of the storm building above them. They laughed, carried briefcases, made plans for dinner. They had no idea their leadership was rotting from the inside. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and thought about the $600 million stolen from the people who kept that company alive. The clerks, the engineers, the managers who sacrificed time with their families, believing in something that was already poisoned. Iron Veil believed they had erased me. But what they didn't understand was that erasing me only made me sharper. I wasn't chasing them with noise. I was dragging them into silence, a silence so heavy it would crush them under their own weight. The board meeting was coming, and with it, the first real crack in their empire. The board meeting came on a gray Friday morning. I wasn't in the building, but I didn't need to be. Through the back doors I'd left in Iron Veil systems, I had access to everything. The calendar invites, the presentations, even the private notes executives prepared for themselves. I watched from my study, coffee in hand, as the cracks widened. The agenda was filled with phrases that told me all I needed. Unexpected variances, financial review, potential compliance issues. Words they used when they didn't want to say the truth out loud. Brian Kingsley had to stand in front of the board and explain numbers he thought were buried deep enough to never be questioned. I could imagine the sweat on his forehead as he tried to sound confident. I had read his talking points, carefully polished lies about delayed contracts, foreign taxes, temporary discrepancies, lies built on a foundation of stolen millions. And while he lied, I was already 3 steps ahead. I had scheduled a second envelope to arrive at the boardroom during the session. Hand-delivered, no sender listed. Inside were 3 documents, another fraudulent invoice, a wire transfer record leading to the offshore account, and a screenshot of Brian's own authorization. Evidence so direct it cut through the fog of excuses like a blade. Stephen wrote to me later that day. He said the moment the envelope was opened, the room went silent. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Brian's face drained of color. The chairman asked where the documents had come from, but no one could answer. Whispers followed, suspicion spreading like wildfire. Some thought it came from an auditor. Others suspected an insider. No one thought of me. That night, Brian left the office long after midnight. Stephen saw him walking to his car, shoulders hunched, briefcase clutched like it was life support. The fortress he had built around himself was crumbling, and he knew it. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. My silence wasn't about revenge, it was about inevitability. I wanted them to understand that their own actions were the weapon that would destroy them. I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to make threats. I just needed to keep pulling the right threads until the entire structure collapsed under its own corruption. Claire noticed me watching the rain that night, the quiet intensity in my eyes. She asked if I was waiting for something. I told her yes, but didn't say what. She accepted my answer because she had seen this side of me before. The patient side. The side that never spoke until the moment was perfect. By the end of that week, rumors inside Iron Veil had become uncontrollable. Executives avoided each other. The board began hiring outside auditors. Fear had settled into the company's bones, a fear that came not from loud accusations, but from silence. I knew then that the real collapse had begun. By the 5th week, Iron Veil was no longer the polished empire it pretended to be. From the outside, the glass building still gleamed under the morning sun. Employees still filed in with coffee cups and keycards. But inside, the air was poisoned with doubt. Every step I had taken, every silent move, had spread cracks they could no longer hide. I kept to my notebook, each page filled with dates, transactions, reactions. I tracked how Brian canceled 3 public appearances in a row. I noted when 2 executives quietly updated their resumes on professional networks. I marked the day an outside accounting firm arrived, carrying laptops and sealed briefcases, moving floor to floor with the cold precision of surgeons. Iron Veil had gone into survival mode. But it wasn't survival. It was dissection. That Monday, I made my first direct move against the structure itself. I compiled a package of documents, fraudulent contracts, wire transfers, the offshore account numbers, and sent it anonymously to the federal regulators. Not everything, not yet. Just enough to raise alarms, to force them to widen the spotlight. The kind of evidence that couldn't be ignored, that would trigger official inquiries and freeze the flow of money. Then I waited. Claire noticed I was calmer that week. She told me I seemed lighter, as though a weight had shifted. She didn't know that regulators had already reached out to Iron Veil by Wednesday morning, demanding explanations for irregularities in international payments. I imagined Brian's hands shaking as he signed yet another false statement, trying to hold the dam together while the water pushed harder against every crack. On Thursday, Stephen's message came late at night. He said security had been tightened, executives were shredding documents, and entire teams had been locked out of systems they normally used daily. Fear had hardened into paranoia. People were looking over their shoulders, whispering in elevators, avoiding each other's eyes. I sat in my study and read his words twice, then closed the laptop. Silence had become my sharpest blade. They weren't being undone by accusations, but by the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had seen everything. The fact that they didn't know who made every decision feel like a trap, every meeting like an interrogation. That Friday, I drove past headquarters again. I watched as Brian emerged just before midnight, flanked by two other executives, faces tight, jaws clenched. They moved quickly to their cars, not speaking. The arrogance they once wore like armor was gone. All that was left was fear. I didn't wave. I didn't follow. I simply watched them disappear into the night, knowing the silence would follow them home, into their kitchens, their bedrooms, their dreams. Iron Veil had fired me with a single email, but it was their own silence, their refusal to see, to admit, to stop. That was about to cost them $600 million. By the 6th week, the silence I had built around Iron Veil was no longer mine alone. It had spread into their hallways, their offices, their boardrooms. Everyone inside the company now felt it pressing down on them. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was fear of collapse. And collapse was exactly what I wanted. The auditors uncovered discrepancies almost immediately. They flagged vendor accounts with no employees, invoices without deliverables, and projects billed 3 times over. Every red flag I had documented was now staring them in the face. And yet, Brian kept doubling down. He told the board it was all clerical errors, blamed the accounting software, pointed fingers at managers who weren't even in the room. Lies stacked on top of lies, shaking under their own weight. I watched it all unfold from my desk. My access still worked. The same arrogance that had made them cut me loose without a second thought had also made them sloppy. I slipped through their systems undetected, recording every desperate move. On Tuesday, I sent a second package of evidence, this time to a national newspaper. Not the full story, not yet. Just a taste. Enough to raise eyebrows, to let the world know something was rotting inside Iron Veil. I signed it with nothing but the word proof. 2 days later, the first article appeared online. It didn't name individuals, but it questioned Iron Veil's unusual accounting practices and growing concerns over offshore activity. Within hours, the company's stock dropped 5%. By the next morning, it was 10. Investors were spooked, employees were whispering, and the board was demanding answers. Stephen messaged me again. He said people were starting to look sick at their desks, as though every email, every spreadsheet, could be the one that ruined them. Executives were snapping at assistants, doors were slamming, and entire departments were told to prepare for restructuring. Fear had turned into chaos. That night, Claire asked me why I seemed so calm when the whole world felt like it was cracking. I told her that sometimes the loudest fight is won by the quietest hand. She didn't ask more. She trusted me, even if she didn't know what I was holding in my hands. By Friday, Iron Veil had lost over $100 million in market value. And yet, Brian still clung to his lies, patching leaks in a dam that was already splitting wide open. I closed my notebook that night and wrote one line beneath the date. They don't realize the storm hasn't even hit yet. Because I hadn't shown them everything. Not even close. By the 7th week, Iron Veil wasn't just cracking, it was bleeding. The article had triggered panic on Wall Street, and investors were pulling out faster than the company could reassure them. Every day the stock price fell lower, wiping millions from their value. Every day the silence grew heavier, and I knew it was time to tighten the noose. I built a final package of evidence, this one larger than all the rest. It wasn't just invoices and transfers anymore. It was the full map, offshore accounts, forged signatures, internal memos, emails where Brian and his circle congratulated each other for outsmarting the system. I had pieced it together with surgical precision, layer by layer, until the whole structure was undeniable. On Monday morning, I sent it directly to federal investigators. This time, no half measures. The fraud was laid bare in black and white. $600 million siphoned out of Iron Veil. A conspiracy that stretched across borders, across years, built on arrogance and silence. That same afternoon, Regulators arrived at headquarters. Black cars in front of the glass building, men and women in suits carrying sealed folders and government IDs. Employees watched from behind windows as their leaders were escorted into private rooms. Brian tried to leave the building, but was stopped at the door. His face, once so smug with certainty, was pale and hollow now. Stephen wrote that people whispered about arrests, about frozen accounts, about prison. He said some staff were crying at their desks, others were already clearing them out, afraid the company wouldn't survive. And still, I didn't step forward. I didn't call the press to claim credit. I didn't even mention my name to the investigators. I didn't need to. My silence had done the work for me. That night, Claire looked at me across the dinner table. She asked if I had finally found peace with what happened. I told her yes, but not the kind of peace people imagine. It wasn't relief or happiness. It was something colder. The quiet certainty that justice had been delivered, that Iron Veil had destroyed itself because I let it. By Friday, the company's market value had dropped nearly $600 million. The number I had written in my notebook weeks earlier had come true, almost to the dollar. Their silence had cost them everything. I closed the notebook for the last time and placed it on the shelf. The game was finished. The empire that had erased me with one email was now in ruins, and I hadn't raised my voice once. The quiet had spoken louder than anything else ever could. The week after Iron Veil's collapse was strangely quiet. News outlets covered it endlessly, headlines screaming about fraud, investigations, resignations. But in my own house, the silence was steady, calm. Claire asked if I felt vindicated. I told her I wasn't chasing vindication. I was chasing balance. And balance had been restored. Federal authorities froze the offshore accounts. The board suspended half the executive team. Brian Kingsley's arrest photos spread across the internet, his expensive suit wrinkled, his expression hollow. He had gone from the face of Iron Veil's stability to a cautionary tale overnight. Employees who once looked up to him now whispered about prison sentences and trials. I watched it all from a distance. I never stepped into the spotlight, never claimed my role in their undoing. That wasn't the point. The point was that their arrogance had been met with something stronger than noise. It had been met with silence, deliberate and patient, until the silence itself became impossible to ignore. One evening, I walked past the shelf where my notebook rested. I opened it and ran my finger over the line I'd written weeks before. Their silence will cost them everything. The ink hadn't faded. The words were still sharp, like a blade left in the dark until the moment it was needed. Claire found me standing there and asked if I was finally ready to move on. I nodded. Moving on didn't mean forgetting. It meant knowing the war had been fought and finished without ever lifting my voice. I thought back to the first moment, the email that ended 11 years of work in a single line. It had felt like erasure then, but now I understood it differently. They hadn't erased me. They had set me free to become something they couldn't predict, couldn't fight, couldn't stop. Iron Veil would recover in some form. Companies always do. New names, new logos, new promises. But the empire I had known, the men who thought themselves untouchable, were gone. Their silence had been their weapon of choice, ignoring warnings, ignoring consequences. And in the end, that same silence became the weight that dragged them under. I closed the notebook for the last time and placed it back on the shelf. The pages were full. The story was finished. Some men fight with noise, with shouts, with fury. I had fought with patience, with precision, with quiet. And in the end, the quiet had been enough to destroy them. $600 million gone. An empire ruined. And all I had done was wait, watch, and let them destroy themselves. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.